President Trump used the nation's 250th birthday to reignite one of the most contentious fights in Washington, the battle over how Americans register and vote. Good evening, and thank you for joining us. Tonight we're looking closely at the president's renewed push for what's being called the Save America Act, a sweeping elections overhaul that has now failed multiple times in the Senate, but which the White House is determined to bring back from the dead. Let's start with what actually happened. On July 4th, as thousands gathered on the National Mall in Washington for the Salute to America 250 celebration, President Trump took the stage after a weather delay forced a temporary evacuation due to severe thunderstorms. Once the storm passed and the crowd returned, the president delivered a speech that blended patriotic reflection with a pointed political message. He praised American veterans, spoke about the nation's founding, and declared that the country was, in his words, entering a golden age. But tucked into that address was a direct appeal to Congress: pass the Save America Act. For those who haven't been following this story closely, here's the background you need. The Save America Act, formerly known as the Safeguard American Voter Eligibility Act, would require Americans to show documentary proof of citizenship, such as a passport or certified birth certificate, in order to register to vote in federal elections. It would also mandate photo identification at the polls and require states to remove non-citizens from voter rolls by cross-checking with the Department of Homeland Security database. Additionally, the bill would sharply restrict mail-in voting, limiting it to cases involving illness, disability, military deployment, or travel. This isn't a new idea. Versions of this legislation have circulated in Congress since 2024. The House passed an earlier version in April of last year, and passed the current version again in February of this year, largely along party lines. But the Senate has been a different story entirely. Under Senate rules, most legislation needs 60 votes to overcome a filibuster. Republicans currently hold 53 seats, meaning they would need at least 7 Democratic votes to move the bill forward. Those votes have not materialized, and the bill has stalled repeatedly. Now let's walk through the timeline. In March, the Senate began actively debating the legislation, but one Republican, Senator Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, broke with her party and voted against even proceeding to the bill. In April, senators rejected an attempt to attach the Save America Act to a broader budget package, with 4 Republican senators joining Democrats in opposition. Then, in early June, the measure failed again when it was brought up as an amendment during debates over an immigration funding package. According to preliminary reporting from NPR, the bill would have taken effect immediately, even as primary voting was already underway in some states. Perhaps the most striking development came at the end of June. House Speaker Mike Johnson attempted a novel legislative maneuver, attaching the Save America Act as an amendment to the National Defense Authorization Act, the annual defense policy bill that funds the military. The strategy, sometimes referred to informally as merving after a military targeting term, was designed to force the Senate to accept the elections bill as part of a package Congress traditionally passes with broad bipartisan support. That effort collapsed on June 30th, when a number of Republicans in the House objected. Representative Anna Paulina Luna was among those who spoke out, arguing that attaching the bill this way would not survive the Senate's procedural rules regardless, and that if lawmakers wanted the Save America Act to pass, it needed to stand on its own as a genuine amendment. That brings us to this month, where the president used his 4th of July remarks to put the issue back in the national spotlight. Standing before the crowd on the National Mall, Trump argued that voter identification and proof of citizenship should be non-controversial requirements. He said all voters should show identification, all voters should provide what he called proof of citizenship, and that mail-in ballots should be limited except in specific circumstances. He framed the legislation as a matter of basic election integrity. Let's talk about the reactions because they've been sharply divided along party lines. Supporters of the bill, including Senate Majority Leader John Thune, have suggested that if the legislation doesn't pass, it will become a defining campaign issue this fall. Senator Mike Lee of Utah, one of the bill's sponsors, has publicly tied its passage to Republican prospects in the November midterms. Backers argue that requiring documentary proof of citizenship is a common-sense safeguard, and the White House has pointed to voter identification requirements in other democracies as justification for bringing federal law in line with what it describes as international standards. On the other side, Democrats and voting rights organizations have raised serious concerns. According to research cited by the Brennan Center for Justice, more than 21 million American citizens of voting age do not have ready access to documents like a passport or birth certificate. Groups such as the Legal Defense Fund and the Campaign Legal Center have warned that the requirements could disproportionately affect married women who've changed their names, elderly voters, rural residents, and Native American voters living on tribal lands. Wendy Weiser of the Brennan Center said it would be up to the Senate to stop the bill, calling it, if enacted, an unprecedented restriction on voting access in American history. For context on the scale of the concern being debated, we should note that a comprehensive citizenship review conducted in Utah, examining more than 2 million registered voters, found only one confirmed instance of non-citizen registration and 0 instances of non-citizen voting. Supporters counter that even rare instances justify stronger safeguards, while critics argue the data shows the problem the bill targets is exceedingly uncommon. Let's bring in the expert perspective. University of Notre Dame law professor Derek Miller has noted that if enacted, the Save America Act would represent one of the most significant nationalizations of election administration in American history, shifting authority that has traditionally rested with the states toward the federal government. Georgetown law professor Steve Vladeck has similarly questioned whether the scale of the proposed solution matches the scale of the problem it claims to address. Beyond Washington, this fight is already playing out at the state level. Even without federal action, more than a dozen states have passed their own versions of SAVE Act-style laws requiring proof of citizenship for voter registration. Mississippi's law took effect on July 1st of this year, requiring annual citizenship verification checks. Other states, including South Dakota, have implemented similar measures with some variations, such as allowing tribal identification as standalone proof of citizenship. What about the public and political impact? Turnout data from this year's primary elections has, according to CNN's analysis, so far favoured Democrats, a trend that adds another layer of complexity to the political stakes surrounding this legislation. Meanwhile, the ongoing battle over congressional redistricting, following the Supreme Court's ruling earlier this year in Louisiana versus Calais, has already scrambled expectations for which party will control the House after November. Voting rights and election administration have become deeply intertwined with the broader fight for congressional power. Economically, the practical implications for state election offices could be significant. Implementing new verification systems, cross-checking citizenship databases, and processing in-person registration requirements would require additional funding and staffing at the state and local level, costs that officials in several states have said they have not yet fully budgeted for. So, what happens next? For now, the Save America Act remains stalled in the Senate, without the 60 votes needed to overcome a filibuster. The president's renewed public push signals that the White House intends to keep pressing the issue, possibly through further legislative maneuvers or by encouraging additional state-level action. Democrats, for their part, have indicated they will continue to oppose the measure, with Democratic leaders suggesting that if their party regains control of the House in November, voting rights protections will be among their top legislative priorities. That is the latest on this developing story. We'll continue to follow any new developments as they become available. Thank you for watching.